Two cops whopped the ass of high authority's children. Imagine being so powerful that rules don't apply to you. Or at least that's what these kids thought. But today, these children of the rich and powerful are about to get a lesson in discipline, respect and self-worth, courtesy of two cops who refused to give up on them. Stay with us to find out how these officers turned spoiled brats into young leaders, and the shocking twist at the end that you won't see coming. It all began on a cool summer night in Willowdale, a city known for its vibrant parks and tightly knit communities. But that night, the tranquility of the historic Gardenwood Park was shattered. The sound of spray cans hissed through the air, punctuated by laughter, a laughter that reeked of arrogance and entitlement. There they were, 4 teenagers, Nico, Bianca, Cairo, and Lila. To them, the park wasn't a symbol of their city's history or a haven for its people. No, to them, it was a blank canvas for their rebellion. Nico, the mayor's son, led the charge, laughing as he scrawled his name in bright red across the park's oldest stone wall. He turned to the others and said, "This park needed some personality, don't you think?" The others laughed, feeding off his boldness. Bianca, with her phone in hand, wasn't just participating, she was documenting. "Smile for the followers," she called out, snapping a picture of the graffiti. Her online persona demanded chaos, drama, and proof that she lived life without consequences. Cairo, silent as always, stood back, his spray can barely used. It wasn't rebellion that drove him. It was pressure. Pressure to fit in, pressure to not disappoint. And then there was Lila, perched on a bench, her designer shoes tapping against the ground as she critiqued the others' work. "This looks amateurish," she sneered. "If we're going to vandalise, let's at least make it art." But just as they thought they owned the night, the sound of approaching footsteps froze them in their tracks. Flashlights cut through the darkness like knives, and 2 figures emerged, their presence authoritative and undeniable. "Drop the cans," a voice commanded, firm but calm. It was Officer Trent Callahan, a man whose reputation for fairness and creative problem-solving was legendary in Willowdale. Beside him stood Officer Maya Delgado, her sharp eyes scanning the scene, her posture exuding confidence. The teens hesitated, looking at each other for cues, but Nico smirked. "Do you know who we are?" he asked, his voice dripping with defiance. Trent stepped closer, his eyes steady. "I do, and I also know what you're doing here is against the law. But more than that, it's wrong. Now, drop the cans." Reluctantly, the teens complied. But instead of cuffs, Trent and Maya exchanged a look, one that said they had a different plan. In the police station's community room, the teens sat in a row, their parents on speakerphones barking orders. The mayor, the governor, the tycoon, and the judge all had one thing in common. They wanted their kids out of trouble immediately. But Trent and Maya held firm. "We're not arresting them," Maya explained to the angry voices, "but we're not letting them off the hook either." Trent leaned into the microphone, his voice steady. "They're going to spend 2 weeks working in the community they disrespected. No exceptions." There was silence on the other end, followed by threats of consequences, but Trent and Maya didn't budge. They weren't doing this for revenge. They were doing this because they believed in something bigger. "Your kids need discipline," Maya added, "and they need to see the world beyond their privileges." And so, with no other option, the parents reluctantly agreed. But for the teens, this wasn't punishment, at least not yet. 2 weeks, Bianca scoffed, scrolling through her phone. "I've been grounded for longer. This'll be easy." Lila chimed in. "I'll just pretend I'm in some charity project. People love that kind of thing online." Cairo said nothing, as always, his face unreadable. And Nico leaned back in his chair, his smirk never fading. "Let's see what these cops think they can teach us." But what Nico didn't know was that Officer Trent and Officer Maya were no ordinary cops. They had a plan. And by the time those 2 weeks were over, these teens wouldn't just have completed their punishment. They would have learned lessons that would change their lives forever. The next morning, the teens arrived at the Gardenwood Community Centre, a small, aging building that served as the heart of the neighbourhood. As they stepped out of their luxury cars, their expressions shifted from annoyance to disgust. "This place looks like it's falling apart," Leela said, wrinkling her nose. Bianca snapped a picture of the peeling paint and posted it with the caption, "Welcome to my personal hell." charity life. But Trent and Maya were waiting for them, unshaken by their attitudes. "Welcome to your new home for the next 2 weeks," Trent said, gesturing to the centre. "Inside you'll find everything you need, cleaning supplies, toolkits, and a list of tasks." "Tasks?" Nico asked, crossing his arms. "That's right," Maya said, stepping forward. "You'll clean up this centre, restore the park, and most importantly, spend time with the people who rely on this place. You're here to learn, not just work." The teens exchanged sceptical looks, but Maya wasn't finished. "Oh, and one more thing," she added. "No phones during work hours." Bianca's eyes widened. "No phones? You can't be serious." "I'm serious," Maya said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The stage was set, and the teens thought they were in for nothing more than an inconvenient 2 weeks. But little did they know, they were about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything they believed about themselves and the world around them. At first, they thought this would be a joke. They had no idea their lives were about to change forever. Stay tuned as the teens face their first day of tasks and their first real challenge. Will they rise to the occasion, or will their privilege blind them to the lessons they're about to learn? Please leave your comments below. The first day at the Gardenwood Community Centre began with complaints. The teens stepped inside the building, their shoes scuffing against the cracked tiles, and their expressions twisted with disdain. "Is this place even safe?" Lila muttered, her designer sunglasses perched atop her head as she avoided touching the dusty walls. Bianca took out her phone, snapping photos. "This is like a horror movie," she said with a smirk. "Except we're the victims of bad interior design." Nico, of course, led the chorus of grumbles. He ran a finger across a window ledge and inspected the dirt. "Seriously, you expect us to clean this dump? We're not janitors." Cairo, quiet as ever, lingered near the door, his body language screaming discomfort. He hadn't said much, but his eyes darted around the room, taking in the peeling paint and broken furniture. But Trent and Maya were ready for their attitudes. Trent clapped his hands, his voice cutting through the teens' like complaints. "All right, let's get started. We've divided you into teams for today's tasks." He held up a clipboard, ignoring their groans. "Bianca and Lila, you'll be organising supplies in the storage room. Nico, you're on graffiti removal duty outside. Cairo, you'll be helping Maya with the library restoration." Bianca scoffed. "Storage room? Isn't that, dangerous?" "Only if you think cardboard boxes are out to get you," Trent replied dryly, handing her a pair of gloves. Nico laughed, shaking his head. "This is pointless. I'll just pay someone to clean this place up." But Trent's face grew serious. "Not here. You won't. This isn't about paying your way out of responsibility. It's about earning something for once in your life." The teens reluctantly set off to their tasks, muttering under their breaths, but the challenges were just beginning. Day 1. Reality check. Outside, Nico stared at the graffiti-streaked wall with open disdain. He dragged the cleaning supplies to the edge of the park and leaned against a tree, making no effort to start. A group of local kids gathered nearby, watching him curiously. They were kids who had grown up playing in the park, who saw its defaced walls as a personal loss. "What are you looking at?" Nico barked at them, his tone dripping with arrogance. The kids flinched, but didn't leave. One boy, no older than 10, stepped forward. "Why'd you ruin our park?" Nico rolled his eyes. "It's just a wall, kid. Get over it." The boy's face fell, and Maya, who had been supervising from a distance, walked over. Her steps were deliberate, her eyes fixed on Nico. "You think you're better than them because of your last name?" Maya said, her voice sharp but calm. She pointed to the children. "These kids understand something you don't. Respect, responsibility, things your privilege has shielded you from learning." Nico crossed his arms, trying to hold his ground, but Maya stepped closer. "Let me tell you something, Nico," she continued. "Self-worth doesn't come from what you're born into. It's earned, and until you figure that out, you'll always be hiding behind your last name, afraid to show the world who you really are." Her words struck a nerve, and Nico, visibly frustrated, threw the cleaning brush to the ground. "I'm done with this!" he shouted before storming off. Trent had been watching from a distance. He turned to Maya and said with quiet certainty, "He'll be back. Trust me." By the third day, the tension hadn't eased. But Cracks were beginning to show in the teens' armor, especially for Bianca. While sorting supplies in the storage room, Bianca realized her phone was missing. Panic overtook her. She searched frantically, pulling boxes off shelves and muttering curses under her breath. "This can't be happening," she cried. "I can't live without my phone!" Hours later, as the group gathered for a break, a young girl from the community approached, holding Bianca's phone in her hands. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her clothes worn but neat. "Is this yours?" the girl asked, holding out the device. Bianca snatched it back, her relief overshadowed by confusion. "Why didn't you just keep it? You probably need it more than I do." The girl's expression didn't falter. "Because it's not mine," she said simply. "My mom says you don't take what doesn't belong to you." The words hit Bianca like a punch to the gut. She stared at the girl, speechless, as the child walked away. Bianca had never been shown this kind of honesty before. It struck a chord, but she wasn't ready to admit it just yet. By the 5th day, the teens faced their biggest challenge yet, leading a community project. Trent and Maya called the group together and laid out the task. "The centre's library has been neglected for years," Trent explained. "Your job is to clean it, organize it, and set up a reading program for the kids." The teens groaned, but there was no way out. As they began planning, Cairo quietly slipped to the back of the group, his anxiety rising. Later, Maya found him sitting alone on the library floor, surrounded by dusty books. "You all right?" she asked, sitting beside him. Cairo hesitated before speaking. "I'm not like them," he admitted. "Nico, Bianca, Lila, they're confident. They know what they're doing. I don't even know who I am." Maya listened, her expression softening. "You know, Cairo, a lot of people feel like that. Even the ones who seem confident are often just pretending. The important thing is to stop worrying about who you're supposed to be and start focusing on who you want to be." Cairo nodded, her words giving him a glimmer of hope. For the first time, he felt like someone saw him, not the son of a wealthy tycoon, but the person he was underneath. But just as the teens began making progress, disaster struck. Late that night, vandals broke into the center, trashing the library and undoing all their hard work. When the teens arrived the next morning, their faces fell. Nico kicked over a broken chair in frustration. "Why are we even bothering?" he snapped. Trent stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Because this isn't about what happened, it's about what you do next." He looked each of them in the eye. "This is your chance to prove you're not just names. Fix it." The teens exchanged uncertain glances, their frustration warring with a newfound determination. And as they rolled up their sleeves, something began to change. The question wasn't if they could fix the library. It was if they could fix themselves in the process. The teens stood in the wrecked library, surrounded by torn books and shattered furniture. The air was heavy with silence, except for the sound of their own breaths, ragged with anger and disappointment. But then something unexpected happened. Nico, the one who had been so quick to mock the effort, stepped forward. He picked up a fallen bookshelf, his jaw set with determination. "We're not letting them win," he muttered, his voice low but steady. Lila crossed her arms, like raising an eyebrow. "And what? You think we're just going to fix all of this?" Nico turned to her, meeting her gaze. "Yeah, we are." His words hung in the air, and slowly, one by one, the others joined him. Bianca grabbed a broom without a word, and Lila started sorting through the mess with a huff of resignation. Even Cairo, hesitant as ever, began stacking books carefully. For the first time, they weren't working because they had to. They were working because they wanted to prove something, not just to others, but to themselves. The process wasn't easy. The damage was extensive, and the teens soon realized that fixing the library would require more than just brute force. "This shelf is completely broken," Bianca groaned, holding up a splintered piece of wood. "What are we supposed to do with this?" Cairo hesitated before speaking up. "Maybe we can repurpose it, make something new out of the pieces." The group turned to him in surprise, and for the first time Cairo met their eyes without shrinking back. It's just an idea," he added quickly, his voice barely above a whisper. But Trent, who had been quietly observing, stepped in. "That's not just an idea, Cairo. That's problem solving, and it's exactly what we need right now." With Cairo's suggestion as their starting point, the teens began to think creatively. They salvaged what they could, turning broken shelves into makeshift tables and using duct tape to repair torn book covers. They worked as a team, each playing to their strengths. Bianca's eye for design, Nico's leadership, Lila's attention to detail, and Cairo's quiet ingenuity. As the hours passed, their complaints faded, replaced by the sound of laughter and the occasional groan of effort. During one of their breaks, Trent gathered the teens in a circle. They sat on the floor, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, but for once their usual smugness was gone. "You know," Trent began, his voice calm but reflective, "when I was your age, I wasn't much different from you." The teens exchanged skeptical glances, but Trent continued. "I grew up in a neighborhood where respect wasn't given, it was taken. I thought I had to prove myself by being tough, by taking shortcuts, by blaming the world for my problems." He paused, his eyes scanning the group. "But then I met someone, a teacher actually, who refused to let me take the easy way out. He made me realize that discipline isn't a punishment. It's a gift. It's what helps you build a life you can be proud of." The teens listened in silence, the weight of his words settling over them. For the first time, they saw Trent not just as an authority figure, but as someone who understood them, someone who had been where they were. "Discipline isn't about rules," he finished. "It's about respect, for yourself, for others, and for the world you're a part of." And with that, the teens returned to their work, their attitudes shifted, their determination renewed. By the end of the week, the library was unrecognizable. The shelves were neatly organized, the walls freshly painted, and the books carefully restored. The teens stood back, admiring their work, and for the first time they felt a sense of pride, not for something they had bought or inherited, but for something they had built. But just as they began celebrating, the sound of raised voices interrupted them. "What is going on here?" The teens turned to see their parents storming into the centre, their expressions a mix of outrage and disbelief. The mayor, the governor, the judge, and the tycoon each radiated authority and anger, their presence commanding attention. "What have you been doing to my son?" the mayor demanded, his eyes blazing as he confronted Trent. "This is unacceptable," the judge added, her gaze sweeping over the teens with disapproval. "They are children, not labourers." Trent and Maya stepped forward unshaken. Maya's voice was calm but firm as she replied, "Your children needed this. Maybe if they'd learned these lessons earlier, we wouldn't be here today." The parents bristled, their voices overlapping in protest, but Maya didn't back down. "You think we're punishing them," she continued, her tone sharpening. "But what we've done is teach them. They've learned discipline, teamwork, and respect, things they were missing because they've never been challenged before." The look on the parents' faces, some defiant, others uncertain, as Trent added quietly, "If you really care about them, you'll stop shielding them from the world and start letting them grow." The teens watched the confrontation unfold, their expressions a mix of awe and apprehension. For the first time, they saw their parents as fallible. Powerful, yes, but also flawed. "A quick question for you. Do you think the parents would see the change in their children? Or would they undo everything the teens had worked so hard to build? Please leave a comment and make sure you give this video a thumbs up." The day of the big reveal arrived. A small crowd gathered at the Gardenwood Community Centre, the once dilapidated building now shining with fresh paint and repaired windows. The park, once marred by graffiti and neglect, had been transformed into a vibrant space with colourful murals, clean walkways, and flower beds planted by the very teams who once vandalised it. At the centre of it all stood Trent and Maya, their expressions a mix of pride and anticipation as they waited for the teens to take the stage. The parents were there too, standing in the back, their scepticism still lingering. The mayor whispered to the judge, "What kind of spectacle is this supposed to be?" But before she could reply, the event began. The teens stepped onto the makeshift stage, their faces no longer marked by the arrogance that once defined them. Instead, they carried themselves with a quiet confidence, their expressions serious as they prepared to address the crowd. Nico was the first to speak. He glanced at Trent and Maya before turning to the audience. "I used to think respect was something people owed me," he began, his voice steady but sincere, "because of my name, my family, my connections. But these past 2 weeks have taught me something different. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. And I hadn't earned it before, but I'm working on it now. The crowd murmured in surprise, the mayor's eyes widening as he watched his son speak with a maturity he'd never seen before. Next was Bianca. She adjusted the microphone, taking a deep breath before addressing the audience. "I'm not proud of the person I was when I first came here," she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "I thought the world was about what I could take, what I deserved. But the people I've met here, the kids, the volunteers, the officers, they showed me something different. The world isn't just about what we can take, it's about what we can give, and giving feels better." Tears welled in the governor's eyes as she listened to her daughter's words, her heart softening despite herself. Cairo was next. He hesitated, his hands gripping the podium as he struggled to find his voice. "I've spent my whole life trying to be what people expected me to be," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But here I realised I don't have to live in anyone's shadow. I can just be me. And that's enough." His father, standing in the crowd, watched with an unreadable expression, his usually stern face softening ever so slightly. Finally, Lila stepped forward. She looked out at the audience, her usual bravado replaced by vulnerability. "I thought I knew how to control everything, people, situations, outcomes. But you can't control life. You can only control yourself. And for the first time, I'm learning what that means." As the teens finished their speeches, the crowd erupted into applause. But the most meaningful moments came afterward, in the quiet exchanges between the teens and their parents. The mayor approached Nico, his expression a mix of pride and regret. "I never thought I'd say this," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "but I'm proud of you, son." The governor hugged Bianca tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You've grown so much," she whispered, "and I couldn't be prouder." Even Cairo's father, a man known for his stoic demeanour, placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You've shown me something I didn't expect," he said quietly. You've shown me strength." For the first time, the teens felt a genuine connection with their parents, not one built on expectations or obligations, but on mutual respect and understanding. Just as the event seemed to be winding down, Trent took the stage, a knowing smile on his face as he addressed the crowd. "Before we close, there's one more thing I'd like to share," he said, his voice carrying a hint of excitement. "This program, this experience has been about teaching responsibility, discipline and self-worth, and thanks to a generous donation, we'll be able to expand it to reach even more kids." The crowd buzzed with curiosity and Trent's smile widened. "That donation," he continued, "came from someone who saw the value in what we're doing, someone who was inspired by the growth they witnessed firsthand. That someone is Mr. Gideon Harper." The crowd turned to Cairo's father, who stood tall, his expression uncharacteristically warm as he nodded in acknowledgement. "Sometimes," Trent added, his voice growing reflective, "the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected teachers." The audience erupted into applause, and for a moment the air was filled with hope and possibility. The teens stood together, their faces shining with pride, knowing they had accomplished something greater than themselves. And as the sun set over the Gardenwood Community Centre, the teens, their parents and the officers stood together, a community united by the lessons learned, the challenges overcome, and the promise of a brighter future. Because in the end, discipline, self-worth and appreciation aren't just values to be taught, they're gifts to be lived.